Just a bit about the roundtable and what we're going to be discussing today. As notions of accessibility are rendered visible on networks and digital media, disability and chronic illness communities are utilizing networks to provide resources and representation. Yet what does it mean to build communities within these platforms? This roundtable discussion offers reflections by artists working to provide new insights into biomedical discourses which reinforce apparent and unapparent representations of disabled bodies. I would also like to note a trigger warning as part of this panel that some of the following conversation may include some responses to post-traumatic stress disorder in the context of sexual assault. And to introduce some of our speakers today, Hayley Cranberry, who's right next to me, is a chronically ill artist. Oh,
Hi.
Hi. Is a chronically ill artist and urban planner based out of New York City. She holds a master in urban planning, a graduate and certificate in geographic information systems, and a bachelor of arts in environmental studies. Hayley is interested in how data, art, and sustainable and urban initiatives can intersect to create community vitality. Her multidisciplinary work explores relevant themes including urban landscapes, the relationship between humans and their environments, and the sick-disabled experience. Hayley runs and curates the Loot Collective, a community and space for disabled and chronically ill women and non-binary artists. Next is Anneli Goeller. They are a 3D artist who uses 3D simulations and artificial intelligence to speculate that the creation of algorithmic selves expand the concepts of personhood. They have been exhibited internationally at institutions such as the Sheila C. Johnson Design Center in New York, Peripheral Forms in Portland, Lithium Gallery in Chicago, as well as the Palazzo dei Cortoloni in Florence. In virtual space, their work has been featured in the Wrong New Digital Art Biennial and the Universal C. And next is Yo-Yo Lin, a Taiwanese-American media artist exploring the nuances of human connection and group solidarity in the context of emerging immersive technologies. She uses intelligent projections, lighting, digital and hand-drawn media, interactive objects, and lush sound design to create meditative memoryscapes. Her work often evaluates human perception and connection as a vehicle for self-knowledge. As first generation from Taiwanese parents, Yo-Yo often draws from childhood memories, borrows iconography from her Tao Buddhist religion. She has shown media works at international multimedia art galleries, Human Resources, Lincoln Center, La Corte Contemporanea, music festivals such as Coachella, Panorama, Steve's Day, and film festivals such as the New York Film Festival, South by Southwest, LA Pacific Asian Film Festival, and other public art venues. Her work has been featured in the Huffington Post, IndieWired, and Surface Magazine, and Yo-Yo is also currently a Eyebeam Access resident for 2019. And I'm Lola Martinez. I am the Curatorial and Engagement Fellow for Refresh and Eyebeam, and thank you all for being here so much. I guess to start off, I think within our conversations, what are the ideas around digital media and the internet, and how do they provide possibilities for community that the outside world does not? What specifically about the internet can create space for disability and chronically ill communities?
I can start. I think that relates very specifically to Loot, which is the collective that I run. As a disabled person, chronically ill person, it's often very hard for me to engage in person with people. I am very tired all of the time, and having an online community allows for a new generation of disability activism, whether that is sharing different health tips with the community, or just knowing someone else that has the same illness as you. I was diagnosed with my illness when I was 14, and I had never met someone that had it, that was interested in the same types of things as me, that was an artist or someone that I would be friends with without, if we both didn't have illnesses. Pretty much until I started Loot. I think I had maybe met one person, and then together it was kind of like an idea that I was like, oh, maybe I'm gonna make a community so I can meet more people like that. And to be honest, I haven't met a ton of people from my own collective in real life because it's mostly online. And I think that eventually it would be really cool to do things in person, but for now we're all online. And it's just, for at least our generation, it makes it very accessible. And although I do think that there is a huge age gap, obviously my collective is mostly millennials, I think, maybe some Gen X, but it's mostly the internet generation. And I think that gives us a platform to connect with each other in a different way that other disability communities might not have in the past.
Yeah, and kind of going off that idea about the age gap, I think a lot of my research has been looking back at old platforms of the web and the internet and comparing them to our current time, where most of our internet time is usually spent on Facebook or Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, and how potentially there are more possibilities of connection when the internet was less framed by these large corporations. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with Second Life, but it still exists today. But it was basically a multi-user game where everyone can create their own avatar and interact with one another. And right now, there's way less people who use it. It was really popular in the early 2000s, but there is a group that still exists in Second Life today called Virtual Ability, run by a woman whose avatar is named Gentle Heron. So members across disability communities are able to use their avatars to explore the world in a way that the physical world doesn't allow them. And I've experienced that same thing as someone who has PTSD from sexual assault. There are certain strategies that your mind attempts to use in order to kind of escape violence, one of which being disassociation, which can be a very dangerous thing in the physical world. But I found that using digital avatars allows me to disassociate in a way that I can control. And I have a avatar named Digital Queer that I've created through 3D scanning my physical body and then artificial intelligence through machine learning. So kind of by creating this alternate person, I've been able to, in a way, disassociate from the physical world, but in a much safer way.
I love that.
Wow, that's incredible. I've been working on a project that is looking at creating an archive of soft data for people living with different chronic illnesses and genetic disorders. And it's very much in progress. So I've kind of been using the internet as a space, a potential space, where I can kind of bring all of this different types of lived data together. And kind of like have like a central hub for people to be able to either relate or analyze or like discover some type of strength within this like lived body of data. And so right now I'm kind of like still in that process of creating that community and creating that outreach before the web platform exists. So yeah, it's very interesting to me because there's so much you could do with the web because it's constantly updating itself. Like just like as we like live our lives, we're constantly having these new experiences. And if there was like a space that continued to grow as we grow, I think that's something that could be very powerful and beautiful.
And I think a lot of people in this day and age, think of internet activism as kind of like lazy activism in a way, and I think that's really ableist because as people with disabilities, that's like our main way of, it's a new way of being an activist, and I think it's sometimes the only thing that is accessible to us. And it is activism to be online with a community where you feel you can share some of the darknesses of being disabled. So.
Yeah, totally. I was like in Brooklyn, and like yesterday was at like the Upper East Side at like K Playhouse, and I was just like, dude, can I just like live stream this right now? Like, I could, like, but I was like, oh no, but I like need to go and like meet people. So yeah, like the live stream and stuff, it really matters.
Yeah, that also makes me want to tie back to certain things because I really like that you brought up this idea of like intergenerationality within these platforms because I think they operate really differently, and particularly like with this idea of like what significant changes over time has been going on with the internet in thinking of terms of especially like the notion of the live stream and how like maybe within your different practices, how can you like looked back and see how folks have used it before and how like it's being more accessible as the future, the growth of the internet has been going on.
Yeah, well, one thing I think about a lot are how even though we have these main platforms that are owned by corporations that we can't really customize to our own needs, users have still found ways to make, for example, Instagram more accessible. At first, users created their own image descriptions for images they post so that people who are blind or who have low vision could use screen readers to still understand the image. And so many people were doing that Instagram decided to incorporate an actual, they programmed a way into their app to do that. So I think that's pretty radical to see users making change in that direct way. But yeah, I mean, the one thing that I see users doing a lot on Instagram is using their own trigger warnings. So like for Instagram stories, like posting a warning that the next few slides are potentially triggering. But that's something that I haven't seen any platforms incorporate, so there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, and also just the fact that Instagram only just added the alt text image description like a couple months ago is ridiculous because all platforms generally have that, and it still can be heavily built upon. It's hidden unless you have a screen reader, so it kind of like doesn't show, you can't read it unless you have a screen reader, so it doesn't show up that you're doing it, so someone might not know that you're incorporating these alt texts into your images, which I try to do for a lot of my on Loop community, like on their Instagram, it's required that all images have an image description. But on my personal, I do it like behind the scenes. But so no one that's just looking at my Instagram would even know that. So it makes it's like this hidden accessibility. So it's like if you don't need it, you don't have to look at it, which I think is really terrible. And it should be there so everyone knows that it's there for people who have low vision or are blind.
But it's gonna totally clunk up the UI. Like, it's just, you can't have it.
Yeah, so like in light of these recent shifts, like I really think about why these things are rendered invisible within like particularly social media platforms and like how a thing that is supposed to guarantee accessibility is really inaccessible to folks and how they're kind of advertised because I think it kind of hides everyone's types of engagements and like how these things should be used, why they're used, and what are the nuances within that.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, like, for the people sitting in the room, how many of you knew that Instagram just added that in the past, like, couple months? Yeah, it's like pretty much hidden, and you can't even. The only way that I've noticed that you can do it is only if you go back into the image and edit it, and it comes up as you can either tag a user or edit, like add alt text. So you can't even do it when you're first posting the image. Am I right?
Yeah, and you can't do it to videos at all. So,
So it's almost like this like afterthought, you know, and it becomes an invisible afterthought, just like disabled people are.
I've also wondered, like, the differences in motivation between like users writing their own image descriptions versus like Instagram and other platforms incorporating it. Like, is it really about accessibility, or is it more a way to have humans describe images that they can use for data mining? That's just a
God,
theory.
I never even thought of that.
That's a theory. That's not, no one's written about that before.
Oh man. It also makes the question about the difference in how technology has made these communities different over time makes me think of just the difference in the platforms that exist now, even versus like 10 years ago. I think, what was it, Facebook just had its like 15-year anniversary or something, or 10-year or something like that. I don't use Facebook anymore, I don't have one. But I know that when I did have one, I was in a group called Sick and Disabled Queers. I think there was also one called Mad Sick Disabled Queers, and then there was another one called Teaching Disability Studies, and those are more what do you call it, like a forum based where people can write and you can message people and you have a full profile, whereas Instagram is just image based and comment based, and you can't really, it's hard to have full conversations on there.
Yeah, it's more like publishing your own content, and like having people come to you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a forum aspect is really useful though, but I'm just like, I don't like Facebook, and I don't want to have to put, kind of like what you were saying, I don't want to have to put my community to like, oh, you have to have Facebook in order to use this. And unfortunately, our main platform is Instagram, but we also have a website that has like the full-length artist features, and it's not as interactive as a forum or Instagram might be, but it at least isn't, it's like separate from social media, which I like.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of nostalgic when it comes to the web, and I think that older platforms, even though they're still owned by a corporation like MySpace, because there's more, you could customize your internet presence.
Were you a scene kid?
I'm not going to answer that.
I was a scene kid.
But like, I don't know, I think it's pretty cool that like as a 12-year-old person I was able to like learn HTML and CSS just because of MySpace.
Totally.
And now you can't change anything besides the actual content that you're posting.
I did it on LiveJournal.
Yeah,
Yes.
like I really think that we need to find a way to have alternative networks like yours, but that can exist on their own without the influence of Facebook.
Mm-hmm. I actually wish that I knew how to make a real website, because actually the Loot website is hosted by Tumblr, but I like kind of like coded around it. But I really want to move it to a different host, but it's just going to take me a lot of time and effort to move everything, you know. But if anyone wants to volunteer to do that.
Yes. Yeah. I'm very much thinking a lot about this web platform I'm trying to build out, because like I want there to be a forum. I want it to be like robust enough for people to be able to like add things to it and like change things around and like be able to kind of like create their own space within the communal space. But yeah, that's like a whole kind of like deconstruction of like forums and spaces of meeting as we know it. So yeah, like things that are like driven to like a communication has been very interesting. Like one of my friends works at VR Chat, which is like also like an avatar-based communication platform. It's like chaos though, because it's just like, you know, there's always like internet trolls. There's like these like little characters that everyone's like obsessed with that are just like swarming the whole place, and just like trolling people and yelling at them.
What is it called?
It's called VR chat.
VR chat.
Yeah. Their whole team is remote too, so they use VR chat to like work together. So like the boss is like a giant fiery like skull, like floating. So it's really interesting to see like, yeah, like how these like kind of like disembodied spaces kind of like bring people together anyway and like create like opportunities for embodiment. Because you can like add your own animations, you can like throw hearts at people if you like them, and like it's like a very interesting way of interacting. So yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like there's like a call for urgency to kind of exist outside of these like mega corporations and their interfaces that they provide. So are there possibilities of how communities can kind of begin to reclaim those spaces? Like what alternatives can be provided online or maybe even offline?
Yeah, like a lot of my background is actually in creating physical spaces. So I think there is so much opportunity in bridging the digital with the physical. And it is, yeah, like it's always a challenge to like be somewhere and like be in a physical space at a certain time. But I also think there's also just like very intense moments of just like intimacy and like presence that can be had when you're like in a space with someone in real life. So yeah, like I'm trying to kind of like take different aspects of illness experience and kind of using a digital language to portray it, either through like animation or like electronic music, and kind of like synthesizing these spaces for people to be in, to be with their illness experience, not just on the web. So I think, yeah, like if there were opportunities to do that, that would be a very kind of like a space for like building community, which is just like, I think the bottom line of like what we're trying to do. Yeah.
I think one way I've thought to make some change would be if people had access and control of their own data that's already being mined and already exists. Like for example, to be like, I have PTSD, and to be able to track patterns of my own activity throughout the web would help point to behaviors that were going on. Like one thing that happens after sexual assault is a period of post-traumatic growth, where it's almost like a period of resilience, but it's just like your brain trying to avoid the situation, so it's just perceived growth, it's not actual growth. And if I was able to go back and pinpoint when that was going on and the moment where it changed from post-traumatic growth to PTSD, because it's like an early sign of someone who will develop PTSD later, I think that would be really helpful for my own mental health, you know. And all of that data already exists, I just don't have any access to it.
What is like actual growth versus the other one?
Yeah, so like post-traumatic growth, some people think you're actually like doing better in objective ways, like taking better care of yourself, or just in general, or happier about the world and yourself. But there's been studies that show that there isn't any objective change, it's just your outlook, because your brain is trying to feel resilient in order to survive.
Interesting.
I think sort of different from what Yo-Yo and Anneli were saying. I think the internet right now really there's this whole theme of self-care that people are obsessed with, and I just want to take out the book that I'm reading because I think that if anyone, people that are in this room, if you're interested in disability activism, you should read this book, and it's just like so important. It's called Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. It's by Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Samarasina, and they talk about so much of what we're talking about now, and in one of the, let me see if I can find it. In one of the parts of this book, they talk about I'm probably never going to find this. But they talk about how people, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's like self-care as like
Oh yeah,
this
self-care.
trendy
So,
thing.
right, yeah, so instead of self-care, this whole book is basically about care work as collective care. So it's about how you can create a community where people aren't necessarily relying on themselves or relying on the government to give them disability insurance or disability social security, or give them health care. I mean, because right now we can't rely on that, and especially because this book is written by and for disabled Black and brown femmes. So a lot of those people, they're undocumented. They don't get health care. So this is about creating collective care and community care and kind of taking away from this internet isolation and making disabilities already isolating as it is. So I guess that would be something I would change, is looking at the internet as a way to create a collective care community instead of an isolated care community, if that makes sense.
Totally, because I think within these platforms, I like how you brought up like meme culture is teaching us how to like build community, but it's also in a platform that's quite alienating at the same time. So like, what are the possibilities to kind of undo that to create kind of like a collective knowledge where people can actually create these communities of care?
Well, I mean, there definitely is a big community on Instagram of mental health memers, but the problem with having any community on Instagram is that a lot of these accounts, mostly trans women of color's accounts, are just deleted without warning or explanation, always referring to Instagram's community guidelines, which from experience and in my point of view are just like white supremacist heteronormative guidelines, which is alienating in its own way. So I don't really have an answer for how to change that. I just think having people think beyond Facebook and Instagram could potentially spark some change.
I think the first step is caring about things that don't directly affect you, but I don't know if the rest of the world is necessarily going to do that, but maybe we can just start doing that.
Totally, and I think potentially like going back to the convo on this idea of data and how data can be made accessible and how we can kind of begin to create knowledge and infrastructure by just understanding what's the difference between personal data and what these platforms, I like to call them like corporate data, and those are the kind of statistics that we kind of adapt to. But what if those were kind of unhinged?
Yeah, totally. I've been looking at personal data a lot. I've been talking to a few different artists. I kind of work in like the web development, data visualization sphere, and also, like people who are like really focusing on qualitative data, really focusing on like bringing light to situations that are like really nuanced and really human, but like really hard to talk about, or just like really hard to measure and track. And I think there's a lot that goes on with that we can't track. Like there's a lot of things that like we can't really put into numbers and we can't really put into graphs and like try to analyze it and like optimize ourselves. Because yeah, we're just like very varied and very messy human beings. So like I think in terms of just like hard data versus soft data, like there's so much there when it comes to soft data, especially when you look at it through the lens of illness. And like, it's very interesting looking at people with illness because it's like they have this very specific perspective, like almost like an expertise with their bodies and with their experiences. So it's a very kind of like, like a very rich sphere of just like different experiences. So knowing that there's so much, just like overlooked knowledge and information out there that would be really awesome to kind of bring to light and kind of showcase and harness to create more art or more change. And I think not a lot of people are really focusing on that. I think a lot of people, are like using wearables and using all these kind of like biometric trackers to kind of like optimize their lives and to like become the best versions of themselves and like be fit. And I think if we can kind of like subvert those tools and use them to kind of take control of our own data, our like weird fucked up data would be like really cool.
Could you give an example of what like a personal soft data would be? I'm curious.
So I've been doing this journal. I'm glad you asked. But essentially I've been like tracking like 7 different dimensions in my life. So I'm like really interested in seeing like the dimensionality of illness. Like having lived with this like genetic disorder, it's called Marfan syndrome. And it's like, it affects my connective tissue. So it kind of like emerges in my life in like various ways. So I've been tracking like how it has been emerging in various ways. So like the one thing I would track would be like I would feel it through my chronic pain. And then other things that are more like logistical, like I literally can't like lift this heavy bag by myself, so I have to like ask a stranger for help or something like that. And then there's also body image, and then social pressures. So like different times where like I'm just like immobilized and like can't do something, but then like there's like this like crushing social anxiety that's just like, fuck, like I can't, be a successful person, et cetera, et cetera. And then like going to the doctor. And then also just like, like future visions of like what this illness will look like in the future. Like what is giving birth to a child like? I don't know. And then also just like past things, like memories that kind of create the experience that I'm having now. So that's all kind of like the soft, overlooked data that I'm like very interested in. And I think with people with different experiences, they'll have different dimensions in how they experience that. And different, like facets of like being. So yeah. Oh, and I have more journals. So if you want one, we can journal together.
Should we open it up to the group?
Sure.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions or comments for the speakers?
When I came to the United States, I noticed in several years, I noticed how families are separated. And I met already several women who are kind of my age, and they hate their mothers and could not solve their problems still. And also all these movies about like Thanksgiving, when family gathering together to make each other miserable, not to make each other good, but miserable. And I'm not saying, what support from family do you have? You like, sounds very isolated, like you are hanging in space, like you don't have any support and not even looking for it. You're looking for support on something absolutely abstract. So my question is, what kind of support from family you have, and what kind of relationship you have with families, and if it gives you some comfort or...
I have to say that that definitely strikes a chord with me. I felt like growing up, so I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was 14, and I was in high school and I was in the hospital a lot, and I was very, very sick. And you know, my family was there for me in this way that was very like logistical, where you know my dad would take me to the doctor and he had healthcare and he would pay for my copays and he would be there when I was in the hospital and he would make sure I was healthy when I like whatever he could do. But I don't feel like my family was there for me emotionally at all. And this was something, you know, I was only 14 and this was something that I don't think my family even had the emotional intelligence to deal with how this might affect a 14-year-old girl going through puberty in high school, and how like shitting her pants every day in school is like probably going to like give her some kind of trauma. And it wasn't really until I moved to New York and I was dating someone and I had a flare-up while I was dating him, and that was kind of the first time I really felt like somebody gave me some kind of emotional support and like some kind of like love while I was sick. And it is, I feel like it is such an, I mean, I can't speak for non-American, but it really does feel like an American kind of like curse, like that Americans, our families just, it's American, it's capitalism, it's we're so disconnected from our emotions, and I think that that's another reason why I wanted to create a community where you can have these emotions and talk about your trauma and talk about what it's like to be ill and feel, you know, when you're just like crying all day because you're in so much pain, and have someone there for you, whether that's in person or not in person, someone you can just text and they're like, I understand and I like feel for you.
I mean, yeah, I do have some sort of support system. I mean, my mom is in the audience, but but going through a traumatic event, it's hard to. I almost feel like, of course, having a support system matters, but it's a very personal experience, and it's also especially with sexual assault, it's a taboo thing to discuss, and it feels sometimes talking about it can cause disassociation. So it almost, I mean, of course it matters, but in a way it doesn't matter because it's an individual kind of almost cerebral experience that you kind of have to go through on your own. And I mean, the only thing that I could say is what we were talking about earlier with communities of other people who've experienced the same thing.
I come from a family who predominantly in the females in my family, we all have the same genetic disorder. So I guess that's a good thing because it really does bring us together, and we do kind of all have like similar varying issues. Both my mom and my sister had heart surgeries, and I can see like that they really bond with that. And it's like there's like a future timeline where I might need to get heart surgery too. So it's like it's good to know like there's people out there who are very close to me who would be able to provide insight on that. So yeah, I guess like, yeah, it really depends on like your illness, because in my experience, it's like, it's a family affair, you know? Like, yeah.
That question actually makes me think of another question, because I do think of support in like very basic terms, but what we kind of didn't touch on was like the idea of support within a safe space and how that kind of support you in a different way, and how people do or do not find safe spaces within like these platforms or like in digital platforms, and what does that kind of mean?
I actually haven't had a problem yet with that on Loot, where there's been any drama or whatever. I think that once you reach a certain amount of followers or like audience, that probably is bound to happen. In which case, I am like the admin, and I think I would probably, if it was someone like someone that was like aggressively like commenting ableist things and like homophobic slurs and things like that, I would obviously just delete all of it and address the group and let everyone know what was going on. But sometimes there are people that are arguing in like platforms like this, and you can see both sides of the conversation. And as an admin of a collective, I haven't had to deal with that yet, so hopefully it doesn't happen anytime soon. But the safe space aspect of the internet is definitely something that, because everyone can access it, so can terrible people that spend their time trying to ruin communities like ours. So
Yeah, one thing I've researched and thought a lot about is instances where the internet is very unsafe. And one example is this early multi-user game before there were computer graphics. So before there were graphics, people would create their own avatars, but only through text. So they would be accessing the game through code, and they would describe their avatars just with words. And it's really interesting. It still exists, but there used to be thousands of people on it. Now when I logged on, there were only 60, so it's kind of scary.
that's still a lot.
Yeah,
60 people.
It felt like walking into I don't know, a world. Just think about a world with only 60 people in it. But in the 90s, there was a case of cyber rape inside of this game. So I think while the internet and digital spaces can be a lot safer because potentially you have the control as the admin and things like that, it can also be just as dangerous.
Wow. What was the question again?
No, just thinking of like what support means within like, I'm specifically thinking of a digital space, because I think a lot of our ideas of support is always logistical, like you said, but what can a safe space offer in support or as support?
I think it's only important to build the space like just enough so that people can be there to provide support for each other. Because I think, yeah, like there's only so much a service can do, and there's only so much that a platform can serve. But I think it's really with like how people interact within these spaces that's really going to facilitate some type of conversation or some type of dialogue. And yeah, like it is a tricky way of like identifying what support is. But I've found like a lot of solace in like finding artists who have been creating art from this place of pain. And it's just like, for me right now, like in this time in my life, I'm very much like looking at art as like a way to like get free in that sense. To just like be able to like share openly and freely and be uninhibited in whatever way that can be.
I'm kind of curious for you, Hayley, in terms of the Loot Collective. Like, what does that mean for you? Like, in response to what Yo-Yo is saying.
I think that Loot has offered a new dimension to myself, something that I never thought that I would be able to create. It's offered a new dimension of support because it is a safe space, even though it's on Instagram for the most part, or just online. It does feel like a safe space because I have met so many amazing artists, just through people either contacting me or the collective and saying, I want to be a featured artist, or I really want to be involved with this, and just meeting other people that feel like I feel like I can talk to them about my illness, and it becomes a form of support that my other friends probably will never be able to fill those shoes. In November, I had a colonoscopy, and when you get anesthesia, you have to have somebody pick you up from the, whatever you call it, the outpatient clinic. And I didn't have anyone in New York to pick me up, and I asked someone that I'm friends with from Loot, who I interviewed. She's my friend, but, you know, I met her through Loot, and I was like, would you be able to pick me up for my colonoscopy? And she did, and she brought me home. And that, like, my family lives in Connecticut, and they're not gonna, like, I mean, I guess if I, like, really needed someone to, I guess, like, one of my parents would have to come in and help me, because I don't know what else I would have done. I would have, like, maybe paid someone, I don't know.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Hi, thank you. This is really great. In a few different moments, you were kind of commenting, well, just now, I guess, on how the online space helps make the physical space a little more accessible. You were talking about live streaming, public events, and the Instagram feature of for people with low vision captioning. And I was just wondering if you had any more examples that maybe physical spaces could use in leveraging the internet to help with physical spaces, or if there are like good examples of, places that you think are doing a really great job.
It's kind of more of like an abstract connection, but just like the way interfacing with the internet works, where you can control your experience, like you could control the sound or you can have no sound, really helps people who are sensitive to like sensory overload, which one example, people with PTSD are sensitive to that as well as others, because like being in an art context, and being artists, we think when we're creating a piece, we're not necessarily thinking about accessibility the whole time, but I think that that's really important. And like a lot of my work is installation based, so there might be sound going on and visuals, and that can be really overwhelming for some individuals. So just like thinking about accessibility from the beginning when you're creating a piece could help. And so thinking about what is the internet experience like, the viewer can control all of these things that might affect them. So kind of bringing that into a physical installation.
My immediate thought comes to the concept of empathy, and I feel like sometimes within these online communities or platforms, someone posts about their illness in Loot, and then you like it, and it gets so many likes and whatever, it gets a lot of traffic to the feature, and people are commenting like, wow, this is so great, thank you for sharing, and it feels very, or like you DM someone and you're like, wow, thank you for sharing this because I have this disease and I wasn't sure, or whatever. There is a lot of empathy going on in the disabled community to each other, and I think that real life lacks empathy. So if you're looking for a way to incorporate some of this, to just like really think about what other people have going on in their life that might not be visible to you, and even just asking someone like, how can I help, something like that, instead of just making it seem like, oh, that person doesn't like me, or they must be so mean because they didn't come to whatever, but maybe to just think about it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think it's also like about, just having a conversation with people who have different experiences. Like if your focus group was more diverse and had people who had different, lifestyles and different abilities, it will serve a lot in how you will be able to create a space that's accessible to a variety of individuals. And I've only have been working on this project for like the past 5 months, and I've talked to so many different people, and they really are like the expertise of like their experience. So and it's always a great conversation if you just come about it in an open-minded way.
I've actually always thought about that, how I'm like the expert of my body, or like I'm the expert of my illness, like way more than my doctor is,
Exactly. You're like, I know this day was like this bad because of this, and this.
Yeah.
And they're like, and you're just like, well, like, write that down.
Yeah, my doctor actually commented on that because I had like not like a full flare, but like a sort of was nervous I was going to have a flare. Like I felt some like pre-symptoms last year. And I was like, well, what if we try this? I think this might help. And he was like, okay, if you think it will help. And then it did. And he was like, that was like really great of how you like had your own input. And I was like, yeah, I feel like doctors should let us have our own input more often. Doctors are so quick to say, no, this is what's right, I'm the expert. But no, I'm the expert.
Exactly.
I know what works at this point at least.
It's funny that I recently found an amazing chiropractor through Instagram. Like, it was amazing. Like, I like put on my story, I was like, hey, I've like moved to New York. I haven't had like any good chiropractors. I've like been to 3 different kinds, like Upper East Side, Upper West Side, like Lower Manhattan, like everywhere, in Queens. And then I was just like, dude, like, this is not gonna work. So I like put it on my story, just like, hey, anyone out there who has a connect, let me know. And then someone like gave me this person's profile, and he was on Instagram too, and he's called Super Hands. And I was like, oh no, this is gonna be bad. And then I like DM'd him, and I was like, hey, like, this is my issue. And I like gave him like this like giant message. And then he like replied, he's like, I believe like everyone comes in at like different levels, but I'm like willing to work with them wherever level they're at. And I'm just like, wow.
So have you gone yet?
Yeah, so I've gone, and he's amazing. And like, I think I found my chiro. Yeah. So
Happy ending.
yeah, happy ending.
Happily ever after.
That was a really happy ending.
Yeah.
We're just wrapping up on time, so but thank you so much. That was an amazing conversation. And do you guys have any final thoughts or?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
All
inviting
right.
us.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll get started with the next talk shortly. Thanks.
If you want to follow us, we can give you our Instagrams. My Instagram is Hayley Cranberry, and then Loot Collective is LUTTE Collective, both on Instagram and or HayleyCranberry.com and LootCollective.com.
My avatar's Instagram is @digitalqueer, and my website is anneligoeller.net.
You can find most of my work at yoyolin.com, and you can find me on Instagram as well. It's a pretty common, not common name.
Thank you.
Thanks all.